at the Wiggin Memorial Library, and I'm also a resident, and I love that. I love being able to live in the town where I'm working. It's not quite National Library Week, but almost. I think we're going to call it a National Library Week event tonight. And we do have a big slate of programs for next week to celebrate. And we are excited to continue to reintroduce in-person programming here. And love to see the turnout. This is an important topic. I was happy to partner with Stratham Energy Commission and all the folks that make this program tonight possible. If that handout has made its way around, I'll pick it up at the end. And the clipboard.
Yeah, it's right up here. Over there.
Right away. Lastly, I wanted to point out that I like to tie my collection to my programs, so I put out some stuff that you can look at. Really helpful energy guides, a lot of the same things you'll talk about here, but in more detail, as you can see. And then tonight, I'm also bringing out an old favorite. We have these cut the carbon kilowatt counters that we were given by PSNH years and years ago. And when I saw everybody on Stratham Talks going, "Oh my God, my electric bill," I said, I think it might be time to bring these back out again. So, are you plugged into it, or do you take it out?
We can plug in.
Yeah.
So how does that work? That
So-
bypasses them.
So you plug in the wall, yep. And then you plug your item, whatever item it is you want to measure.
This is a laptop charger.
That's a laptop charger. Go ahead and hit the kilowatt hour button.
Oh, it tells you that.
And it tells you how, but at the end of the program, we're going to know how many kilowatt hours we used on that particular device. And it's good for catching things that are slow draws, which you'll learn more about maybe later. All right, without any further ado,
We're all set.
next up, Joe.
Thank you, Scott.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name's Joe Anderson. I'm part of the Stratham Select Board, and on behalf of the town, I just want to welcome everybody and thank you for coming. I want to introduce the Stratham Energy Committee, Paul DeShane, Mike Welty, Matt O'Keefe, and Joe Van Gomes. Joe and Matt are going to kick it off, and they'll come up and talk to you.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Like Joe Anderson said, I'm Joe Van Gombos, a member of the Stratham Energy Commission, and here to give a quick introductory presentation ahead of the main event of the night, and this is a presentation on competitive energy supply. So I'm going to fly through this presentation, but there are a couple key resources that I'll be pointing you to throughout it. My buddy Matt O'Keefe is going to step in as well and walk through a quick part of this. And I'll just note, Matt and I both work at Unitil. We're both on the energy efficiency team there. So, looking forward, we're good resources for folks to talk about efficiency and other aspects of, energy management, utility affairs, these sorts of things. So this is a presentation on an overview of electric energy choice opportunities available to New Hampshire residents and businesses. Hopefully this works. Real quick, we're going to talk about what is competitive energy supply, how you can choose a competitive energy supply contract, some key considerations going through that process, and then I have one quick note on a relatively new aspect of the New Hampshire energy industry, energy economy, which is called community power aggregation. So in the concept of energy competitive supply, there is the electric grid. Don't want to get too lost in the many, many words on this slide, but this is the way that I typed it up, so I'm going to go through it real quick. Unitil is your electric distribution company, the company that owns the poles and wires and meters in the town of Stratham and surrounding towns. Unitil buys energy from power generators that produce electricity, power plants around the New England area. The relationship between power generators, which are private companies, and Unitil is managed by an entity called ISO New England. They are a regional New England nonprofit, non-government organization that creates and manages the energy market, the exchange between power generation, private companies, and end users, which flows through utility companies. And ratepayers in New Hampshire have two primary options with regard to the energy supply that they're buying and paying for, consuming and paying for. You can get a default service from your utility That's what the vast majority of residential ratepayers, residential customers in New Hampshire do. And that is provided by the local utility as a pass-through cost. On a 6-month basis, Unitil goes out to bid to the market, locks in prices for the coming 6 months, and those are the default service option that people pay for on their utility bills. We'll get into what that looks like in just a little bit more detail in a moment. The other option that we're excited to give a little bit more insight into today is competitive supply contracts. You, as a ratepayer, can go to the energy market and sign a contract with a third-party power supplier. You do it because you want to pay a lower rate and or you want to have a higher renewable energy content in your bills, you know, if you're motivated by those sorts of aspects of being a good citizen. So we'll run through what that looks like. Again, a lot of information here. The main thing is on this slide, that's the utility bill. There are 2 components to your utility bills. There's delivery, and those are fixed fees. Those never change. They change every few years based on utility tariffs, but signing up for a third-party supply, this electric service component of your bill doesn't change. The electric supply can change. Sometimes it will say default service. This is actually a snip of my bill, and I have a third-party supply that's called Energy Rewards. And if you see down there, you know, people are paying, the current Unitil default service is 25.9 cents. Last fall or something like this, I signed up and got 17 cents. And just a small snippet of the kind of rates that are available for folks. Unitil is just changing the look of our utility bills that are coming out. So just wanted to give you this as well. The next bill that you all receive, which I think is coming out like very soon, you know, you'll get them in the next few days. It looks like this. It's the same components, just redesigned a little bit. Electric service, these are pieces of your bill that won't change. Electric supply, you have the ability to sign up for an alternative contract and change. I'm going to kick it over to Matt to run through the logistical steps of what it takes to actually review options for third-party supply and how to execute that kind of contract. So Matt, you can take it away.
Thanks, Joe. As Joe mentioned, the different parts of everybody's bill, but basically there was legislation about 3 decades ago called deregulation, which kind of separated utilities from owning power supply and having other power generators that everybody can buy from competitively. It was used heavily by commercial customers, but not so much by residential customers. Within the past few years, there's been quite a bit of desire to have more flexibility and more options out there. So that's now available to folks, and actually the New Hampshire Department of Energy has a great site where they basically pull everybody to. You can go and select as a consumer, choosing an energy supplier. From there, it'll take you to another link that will take you to a spot where you can compare products that are out there available for folks. And then when you get there, you just need to choose that you're a residential customer and that you're Unitil. If you're not Unitil, whatever your utility is, choose it from there. Again, if you own small business or large business, just choose those options there and it'll look very similar. But you need to make sure you choose which utility you're currently paying your bill to. And when you do pay your bill, as Joe mentioned, still going to be paying your bill to Unitil. It's just going to have that energy component carved out, and on the bill it'll show it as a separate charge. And then from here, it's going to take you to kind of a whole list of various options that you can choose from energy suppliers. As Joe mentioned, right now our current default rate that the utility buys on behalf of all residents, it goes up and down every 6 months. So you can buy a different product, and you can do it for different terms, at different lengths that you want to have for a contract. As Joe mentioned, you can have more or less renewable energy. That's your thing. And then you want to take a look at what the price per kilowatt hour is. And so this is one of many products that are made available for folks. And so when you go to the site, you'll see that it's you've got, I think now I looked, and there's almost 24 different options that you could choose today. So you want to pick what's right for you. It's kind of like if you're looking at cable or cell phone, like there's all kinds of options that are out there. You want to make sure that you're picking something that's right for you. And keep in mind, if there's a cancellation fee, Some of them have that, so you want to make sure if a better price comes out and you want to switch, that you know that you're responsible for paying that cancellation fee if it has one. Also, when the term ends, you need to be sure of what are you going to do when the term ends. Again, just like your cable bill at home, you get an introductory offer and it's whatever price for the first 12 months. After that, it's going to skyrocket up. So you just need to be aware of that. You have plenty of options to go back to this site or back to the Unitil default rate if you so choose. And then, again, just kind of the key considerations you want to have. The site you want to be aware of is, again, the Department of Energy of New Hampshire. So it's energy.nh.gov. And when you get there, it'll even have a phone number and links if you want to contact certain people and ask questions about it. But you want to know, what is that term length that you're signing up for? If you like a price and it has a 3-year term, go for it. That way you have a fixed price for those 3 years. If you like the higher renewable, make sure that you're picking something that has a higher renewable component. Just to compare, the utilities by law, right? We have a renewable portfolio standard in the state of New Hampshire. And so the goal is to have like 25% renewables by the year 2025. So that's about where we're at today, probably a little bit below that. So if you want something higher than 25%, those options are there for you. And then basically, again, are there variable rates or fixed rates? Most of them are offering fixed rates. But again, just kind of look for the fine print there to make sure that you're not signing up for something that you're not prepared for. And all of this, thanks again to Scott for not only hosting us tonight, but he's also made some of his staff and himself available to walk people through this process. If you have any questions or want to do it and ready to do it, but you don't want to do it without any oversight, come on in. Scott will assist, and he'll reach out to us if there's any questions for us to help out with as well. And I'll switch it back over to Joe, who wants to finish up with one item that you'll be hearing a lot about, and that this town of Stratham is also going to be participating in shortly. So,
Yes.
Joe.
Cool, thanks, Matt. Tons of information here, but slides will be available, and we're just trying to point people to the available resources. An exciting new development in New Hampshire energy law and opportunities for residents and municipalities is this concept of community power aggregation. The gist of this is that laws have changed in New Hampshire such that municipalities can create plans, have these plans approved by the Public Utility Commission to go out to bid on behalf of all of the residents of their municipality to competitively procure power supply that is an alternative choice to the default utility rate. It's active now. The many plans have been approved. Rates are going live. The rates that have come out recently for participating towns like Exeter and other towns around New Hampshire are lower than default utility supply. So it's an exciting development. Stratham has a group called the Stratham Aggregation Committee, and we are working on developing Stratham's plan to provide lower rates as essentially a default option to all ratepayers in Stratham.
What
Yes.
does that say for the per kilowatt, 0.14 cents?
Yes, yeah, and that is the rate that will be offered as the Exeter default rate. So Exeter has Exeter Community Power. They did a lot of work in the last couple of years, tons and tons of volunteer time developing their plan, and Stratham's going to benefit from that. We are going to look at what they did, and
So not like Rye has it too, but they might not have the same rate because of the number of people maybe, or?
it's a good question, and I don't know. It's kind of all new and developing.
I can answer them if you want to.
Great.
From Clean Energy, New Hampshire, and yeah,
Awesome.
they're all the same.
Oh, okay.
Yep, and they'll change as over time and as things grow, but they'll all be the same.
Thanks, Katrin. Cool. I think
Just one last thing. So we started kind of our first draft pamphlets available from the power aggregation.
so. If you want to learn more about community power in the immediate term, there's a pile of pamphlets right here. Grab one on your way out. Really introductory information. We're working on getting the Stratham Electric Aggregation Committee's website filled with more info. But honestly, you can Google Exeter Community Power and go to their site and see all the information that we're going to copy and paste into ours. That's how a lot of it will work. Thank you, everyone. We're gonna kick it over to Ted Stiles. Ted, I'll let you do your own intro. I think you're the man.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Welcome, everybody. My name's Ted Stiles. I am also a Stratham resident, and I kind of wear a couple different hats right now. I was a teacher for about 20 years, and then I got into energy auditing, so I'm an energy auditor for one of the companies in the New Hampshire Saves program. I also still do some teaching. I spent all day today teaching aspiring energy auditors at Lakes Region Community College. They had their first day of classes today. We got a full group of 12 people. So I guess in a way I'm sort of training people to kick me out of my own job. And what else do I do? Oh, and then I do button-up workshops here for Plymouth Area Renewable Energy. They are the folks that put this together for the utilities that you see here. They're the ones that sponsored this program. Glad to see so many people here. I was telling somebody before, I did one of these, I do about, 10 a year or something, but I did one in Portsmouth, I think it was 2-3 years ago, before COVID, and only 2 people showed up. You think Portsmouth, with all that money and all those old houses, and they have a really big energy committee and stuff, I thought it was going to be packed to the gills. 2 people. I think there was something big going on across town that night, so glad you're here. Refreshments are over there, bathrooms are out there if anyone needs it. Got a lot of stuff to try to cover for you tonight. I talk pretty fast. You're more than free to ask questions, but chances are I'm going to probably cover it. If I don't, I'll stick around at the end. What time does the library close?
I'm gonna lock you in and you're gonna go out this way.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter, you can stay outside.
All right, because oftentimes we're getting booted out of the library.
Yeah, no.
Like in Hudson 2 weeks ago, they were kicking us out.
No, you're all good, you're just gonna
And
go.
then we got locked out. It was a fiasco. Anyway, so here's what we're here to talk about. Kind of a quick overview of what we're going to cover tonight. Real rough speaking. I'm going to probably skip through some of the slides, really kind of quick, or because oftentimes the program ends up going too long otherwise. I usually ask people this question to start with, just to have some fun. Anybody know the answer to this question? Pretty easy.
One you don't use.
Oh, you took my thunder. There's some smart people in the audience tonight. Well, usually somebody raises their hand and says solar, and then usually somebody else says, no, I think hydro is better. You can get into the weeds with that stuff, right? I'm a big fan of solar. I'm a big fan of hydro. I think all those are great. But anytime you're producing energy, no matter how clean you think it is, there's always a downside to it, right? There's an environmental impact. There's an effect on our planet. So when I got into doing energy, when I was kind of getting burned out of being a school teacher, I wanted to do something in the energy field. I saw this bumper sticker, and it said the greenest energy is the energy you don't use, and that really hit home to me. So I'm glad there's people doing solar and things like that, but I'd much rather be involved in reducing people's energy versus figuring out other ways of producing it. Again, both are important, but this is kind of where I fit in, I think. This is probably why most of you are here tonight, because we spend a heck of a lot of time, money on fuel, right? New Hampshire has one of the highest fuel costs in the country for electricity, for oil, for propane. And most people are heating their house for how many months? 6 usually, right? I had a customer from South Carolina last winter, and in the middle of the audit, he's like, how much longer? I'm like, I have about another half hour. He's like, no, how much longer do I have to heat this place? I spent $9,000 already, I'm like, mid-April, late April, sometimes into May. And he's like, what, 6 months? I'm like, yeah, the Chamber of Commerce didn't tell you that? And when you called and said I'm moving to New Hampshire, I'm sure they told you about no sales tax, no income tax, awesome beaches, mountains, lakes, the whole bit. What they don't tell you is that you're probably, and he couldn't believe that his house used oil. He's like, I'm like, that's the most popular fuel in New Hampshire, dude. Down there, you have really cheap natural gas, you have really cheap electricity. You're only heating your house for a couple days a year anyway. Your house is actually probably following a building code, which is not a guarantee here in New Hampshire either. They don't tell you that on the phone when you say, I'm going to move to New Hampshire. So he was actually, in fact, while I was doing the energy audit, the little girl came running up and she's like, Mommy, my iPad's broken. I can't get my homework done tonight. She's all worried. And the mom's like, oh, honey, you got to take your gloves off. They won't work with gloves on. It was so cold in their house that the little girl had gloves on trying to do her homework, right? So we spend a lot of money on our energy. This is kind of funny because this is higher electricity rates are looming. And this is back in 22. They're blooming has happened, I suppose. But when you look at this graph, the thing that jumps out to me is the biggest piece of the pie here is space heating. It's the biggest part of the family budget for energy, right? So I'm glad that there's people here studying better refrigerators and stuff. I'm not an engineer, so I can't do that anyway, but even if I was, like, that's just a small little piece of the pie. Like, I'm glad I'm working over here. I'm trying to help people, reduce the biggest piece of the pie. Electric bills, we're not going to spend some time on that. So this is kind of an interesting chart because it's not really like highest to lowest. It's sort of highest to lowest, but it also takes into account like what's the sort of lowest hanging fruit or the places where you can possibly have the biggest impact on your electric bill. Right, so lighting here is for, again, average family or household, 1,200 kilowatt hours a year. That's not the biggest thing in the house. In this house, it's the water heater, but not a whole lot you can do with your water heater. A little bit more you can do with your lighting. You can switch over to LED lights and things. Refrigerators are high up here. That's about 1,000. Why? Because the refrigerator's on all the time, right? You're only using your washer, your dryer, your dishwasher, a little bit each day. So no matter how good those things are, how efficient they are, there's only so much energy savings you can get out of that. The refrigerator, on the other hand, is a big one. They've also had some really good technological gains with refrigeration too. And you can see how it works its way down here. Dehumidifiers, some people are really surprised to see how much those use. But on the other hand, you wouldn't want to unplug your dehumidifier in your basement if that's the only thing keeping your basement from turning into like a jungle with mold and things. Sometimes you're just forced to do that, right? Yeah, this obviously would, change based on, how many kids you have, how long they're taking their showers, et cetera, what you're keeping your thermostat on. Won't spend much time on that because someone talked about the kilowatt meter. You can use that to figure out individual loads, but I will spend a minute or two talking about this one, which is a little bit higher level. They have these, instead of measuring individual appliances like this, they now have whole house monitors. Sense is the one that this is showing here. On your phone, you can be at work and you can be like, oh, look, my daughter just took a shower because the electric water heater just came on, and my son he just left to go to school because the garage door just opened. You can see exactly in real time what's being used and how much it's costing you. Since it's hardwired, it actually goes in. You have to open up your electric panel. You don't have to be an electrician to put it in, but you ought to know something about electricity. I'm actually encouraging a lot of the energy committees to maybe pick one of these up for the energy committee, and then you could install it in someone's house for a month, see what they can learn about their house, and then pass it on to the next person. I think it would be a really good thing for groups like that to do. Also really good for figuring out really weird things, like if let's say you've already done a bunch of stuff, but your bill's still too high, and maybe your well pump is circulating too much, or maybe something else that's hardwired in your house that you can't really do that with this type of device. So those are the Sense, I think, is about $250. It'll actually work too. They have a solar version too, so if you have PV, it can work with that too, and you can sort of control and monitor that too. Again, I don't know, Andy changed it to electrician install. Technically, it's not electrician install. I think we're supposed to say that just to cover ourselves, I guess, but this seems almost silly to put in here, but you'd be surprised. People are paying me good money to help them save on their energy. And I go to their house, and they're in the backyard gardening or something, and I'm going around the house thinking, oh, there must be a lot of people home, because I hear all this music in this room. I open up the door, and there's a stereo playing, but no one's in there. And then, oh, someone's in here watching TV. Oh, no, there's no one in here, but the TV's on. The lights are on in the basement. And, I think a lot of us have gotten into sort of some pretty bad habits. So there's a lot of behavioral things you can do to cut down on your electric bill, too, just by keeping things off when you're not using them. Other sort of energy conservation tips regarding electricity: turn your hot water heater down. A lot of people have it at some astronomically high scalding temperature, which is dangerous and kind of a waste. So 120 is all you need. This is kind of interesting. Did anyone see a problem with this picture? This is why that picture should not be on this slide for saving electricity. Yeah, it's a gas heater, right? Because the gas light coming in here, that's very good, right? So technically, this is not going to save any electricity. It will save propane, but good. I'm glad you picked up on that. Again, dehumidifier, if you have to use it, but make sure you're using it the right way. This shirt has actually never seen hot water, I don't think. It's still pretty clean. I do sometimes use hot water for my clothes if they're really dirty, but most of my clothes, I found that you don't need to use hot water. I think we could still legally dry our clothes outside using a solar clothes dryer here. Last week in Hudson, I actually had somebody tell me that their homeowners association or something has passed a new thing saying that they can't hang their clothes out, and they're going to try to fight it. So I don't think we're headed that way here, so I'm not too worried about it, but that'll save you some. LED lights, I can't say enough good things about them. You know, when I first started doing this, we were putting in the little squirrely, you know, CFL bulbs, which were just terrible because they had mercury in them, they blinked, they took forever to warm up. I mean, it's just, I kind of wish they never even invented those because it gave a lot of people a really bad feeling when it came to LEDs. LEDs are not the same at all. They don't have mercury, they come on right away, they don't blink, you can get them that work with dimmers, you can get different hues and different tones, you can get them for chandeliers, three-way switches, you know, low, medium, high for reading. I mean, they've really done a great job figuring out exactly what people want. And the bulbs themselves only use, a lot of the ones I'm putting in only use 8 or 9 watts of electricity. And they're replacing something that was using 75. So you can put in 6 or 7 of them, and they're not even equal to the one you threw in the trash. So pretty amazing stuff. Yeah.
Do the outside lights, like if it's winter and cold, does it take them a little bit longer to get?
I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I don't have any, no, I have LED lights outside. They don't seem to do
I
that.
might have them wrong.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you might have inside lights you're putting outside, maybe. The one thing I would caution you about is you want to look for. They measure it in Kelvin, 2,700 Kelvin or maybe 3,000 Kelvin. It's also called warm white or soft white. Don't get sucked into getting the ones that say daylight. Most people love daylight, right? So you go to the store like, oh yeah, daylight. I love daylight. And you get it home, you plug it in, it looks like this. It's kind of like that bluish tint. Most people really don't find that very soothing, right? So soft white or warm white will be something kind of yellowish like this. It sort of, you know, mimics like what you would get from a candle or like the old school bulb that you probably grew up with in your bedroom, you know, when you were younger. So, and they're also really cheap now. I did my whole house with LEDs, I want to say 19 years ago at this point, because my kid's 21. They were running around the house, and I needed to put in, I had the kind of switch where you hit one switch and 8 lights come on. Open concept house, they're running all around. I needed, you know, I had to have like 16 lights on. The CFL bulbs weren't working, they kept burning out, they were flickering, so I spent like $30 a bulb. That same bulb is like $4 now. They really came down in price a lot. Unfortunately, I think the longevity of the bulb also has suffered a little bit. Back when they first started, they lasted quite a bit longer. They still last a long time, and I still suggest them, but that's one way that they got the price point down to the point where normal people would buy them, besides like me. Like, no one's going to spend $30 a bulb, but 3 or 4, you know, most people will spend that. Other real quick, simple, easy things you can do, you know, a low-flow shower head. It's not going to be just a little trickle of water on your head. You can put pipe wrap on your pipes in your basement if you have them. Real cheap stuff, real easy to put in. And you know, we're not going to tell you to go out and like throw out all your appliances and get Energy Star, because that would be really, really bad for the planet. But if you do have an appliance that needs to be replaced, that's when you start looking for that Energy Star label, right? There's also rebates for a lot of different things through Energy Star. You can even get like a rebate on a room air purifier now, for gosh sakes. If you have a pool, you can get a rebate on your pool pump, right? It's not just like washers and dryers and things now. So again, you can look at this website when you have time, and you'll be able to get some more information about all this stuff. I can also make the PDF presentation available for people who want it too. So here we get to sort of the meat of it. You know, like hopefully this isn't what you look like in your house. Although those people from South Carolina almost were looking like this. You know, hopefully this is you just walking around outside. But you know, when people are looking to save energy or looking to save money, you know, I could just come in and say, hey, you just turn your thermostat down and dress like this. Like, you'll save money, you'll save energy, right? But that's not acceptable. People want to stay warm in their house and be comfortable and save money at the same time, right? So that's kind of like where the challenge comes in. A couple of real low-cost options you can do is just to make sure you're turning down the heat when you're not in the house, right? A lot of people will argue against this and say, well, geez, you know, if I turn it down during the day, when I come home and I crank it up, it has to run for a long time to get the house warm again. So isn't it sort of the same thing, you know? And the answer is no, it's not the same thing. It does have to work a lot when you come home to heat your house back up, but the energy that it takes to do that is less energy than it would have taken to keep your house at that same temperature all day long. Same thing when you go to bed at night. You know, a lot of people like to sleep cold, so turn it down at night, you'll definitely save some energy. It doesn't work if you're just doing, you know, going to the store for some milk. Like, that's not going to work. But, Programmable thermostats, honestly, I'm not a huge fan of some of these really expensive Wi-Fi enabled ones. I don't know, yet, I should say, because maybe I'll get converted. But right now, a $30 programmable thermostat from the hardware store will turn your heat down if you forget when you go to work. It'll turn it down while you're in bed and you're too lazy to get out and turn it down. It'll turn it down for you. So it'll do almost all the things that those fancy ones do at a fraction of the price. So it's crazy how many people leave their ACs in all winter. Like that's not the way you should run your house. It's crazy how many people leave their storm windows open all winter instead of closing them. Like they're not designed if you open, you should close them. And windows are supposed to be latched shut, not just for like security, but because the window itself is designed to keep out cold air when it's latched shut, so that the seals and stuff will actually work a lot better if you actually go ahead and use that latch. So those are real basic low-hanging fruit things. I don't want to get too deep into this because you might remember it from high school, and you might not have had a pleasant experience in high school in physics learning about conduction and convection and radiation, but it is good to sort of know these three things. That's how heat moves, 3 different ways. And that is, radiation here in New Hampshire is not really that big of a deal. If we were in Florida or Arizona, we might spend some time on that, but we're really going to kind of focus on these two. It's always happening. If anyone ever tells you they can stop it, then you can challenge them on that, because all we can really do is slow it down. Right? It's always going to be happening. You're always going to be losing heat. And that heat is always going to be going too cold, right? So that's another sort of basic physics thing that you have to keep in mind. So when it's cold outside and you're heating your house, you're always going to be losing heat towards the cold, from the warm house out to the cold. So keep that in mind as we go through here. Again, conduction is heat through a solid object, right? So this person is not wearing a glove, so they're going to drop that thing pretty quick because the heat is going to go right up through that. I'm assuming that's a piece of metal. It's going to go right up through the metal, right? So yeah, that's just the general principle of conduction. It always goes in that direction. So what do we do about it? We use insulation, because insulation is actually not a very good conductor. It's something that actually will resist heat flow. So insulation is where we sort of fight this battle with. A lot of things have, people use a lot of things for insulation. This is like underwear and pantyhose that someone had stuffed into a hole. This is like, believe it or not, this is like a fully insulated house back in the 60s, like 2 inches of balsam wool. Anyone know what this might be here? This is wood, but this is insulation right here. It kind of looks like horsehair. It's a good guess. You're in the ballpark. I'll give you a hint. I was really surprised to find it because I was way out in Walpole, New Hampshire the first time I saw it, and I didn't expect to find it out there. Yeah, it's seaweed. Yeah, there was a company called the Cabot Company back in the 20s. They used to dry out seaweed, put it in bags, and send it to people, and they would insulate their houses with it. I'm sure the mice loved it. It does help a little bit, but not really a modern, very good modern material. So things have R values, and R value is simply just a number that we assign to something to tell you how good is it at slowing down that heat loss, right? Everything has an R value. It's all a little bit different. So here's sort of some samples of different insulation materials. Like this is spray foam. This is spray foam here is about R6 or R7 for every inch. Pink fiberglass. It's in a bag because it gets kind of itchy. That's only R37 per inch, luckily. This is blown cellulose, made out of like recycled newsprint. It's not going to hurt you, but it'll make a mess. That's why it's in a bag. That's 3/6. So that's appropriate in some places. Rigid foam board. There's different types. This is called Thermax. It's a foil-faced product. That's about 6 or 7 per inch. This is vermiculite. This is not something you would put in your house these days, but this is something you would find in someone's house. This has an R value to it. It also has asbestos. That's why it's in here. So I should probably put it in a plastic container too instead of glass, because I know one day I'm going to drop it and break it. But, so that might be something you have in your house. Yeah, that's most of them. It's just, even packaging material that you might get, that has an R value to it. It's not listed there because no one really cares about exactly what the number is, but it's supposed to keep, any food or drink you might get, warm or cold as it comes in. So it doesn't mean that you always should use the thing with the highest R value, because there's certain places in your house where that might be appropriate, but there's other places where, if you can achieve the same result with something like this, it's a lot cheaper, then that's the better way to go. The other interesting thing about it is like you can't just focus on the R value, the number, because if somebody goes in and puts something with a really good R value in and they do a really junky job doing it, then the whole place just suffers, right? So the install quality is actually just as important or more important. And unfortunately here in New Hampshire, there's nobody looking out for, I mean, like it's kind of funny, I'll talk about this later, but I mean, if I was gonna cut, are there any hairdressers here? I think in New Hampshire you have to be licensed to cut hair, like, but I can be an energy auditor just off the street, you know, and I can put in insulation, no one cares. The state doesn't, you know, so you have to sort of be careful. Energy codes are interesting because technically we're following the energy code right now if you look on the state website, but it's up to each individual town to actually do that or not. And some towns are doing it, some towns aren't. You know, so an attic is supposed to be, a flat attic is supposed to be R49. Well, most of the attics I go into are like R10 or 30. Sometimes they're actually R0. They're like literally no insulation. Walls are almost never what they're supposed to be, and you know, basement walls, same kind of thing. So we have a long way to go. And I'm not going to do this little quiz here just in the interest of time, but it gets back to that same idea that if someone puts it in and there's all these gaps and cracks and holes, it has a huge effect on the performance of that whole thing. A couple ways that insulation gets messed up in an attic. Here's an attic that has insufficient insulation, obviously here, because you can actually see the drywall. So that's like, there's no insulation right here. Right here, these are 2x6s, and there's a couple inches sticking up, so that means there's only 3 or 4 inches of insulation. That's nowhere near enough. Here's some fiberglass that was laid down, and it's got all these cracks in it, and you can see right down into there, and you can see the wood under there. That's a sort of incomplete. And this is an interesting one because it's sort of misaligned. Like this is actually done with this foil face board, which is actually really expensive. This stuff's like $90 a sheet or something. And this person decided instead of insulating the floor of their attic, they would insulate the slopes in the end wall, which is sometimes it's a good strategy, except that they have a gable vent here. That's daylight coming in there. That's like having an open window. It's like you just spent like $3,000 and yeah. So here's another one. I can maybe get some people on. You guys are really smart. I haven't been able to get you on any. Heat rises. True or false? True. No, it's false. Sorry, you're wrong. I got you. It's kind of a trick question, though. It looks like heat is rising, but I already told you where heat goes. Where does heat go again? To cold, right? It doesn't matter whether that cold is up, down, left, right, north, south, diagonal. It's going to go toward that cold. But sometimes it looks like heat's rising, but it's kind of just fooling you because it's not the heat that's rising, it's the hot air that's rising, or the hot water if it's a liquid that you're looking at, like if you're in a lake or something. Right? That's why hot air balloons work, right? So you have a big burner down here that makes hot air. The hot air rises, and it lifts the balloon up. Well, it's not the heat that's rising, it's actually the hot air. But it gives the appearance, or it fools people into thinking that they're seeing heat rise. So that's the other way that the houses lose energy, is through what the other one is called convection. Convection causes what we call the stack effect, and that is when you heat your house, the warm air comes to the top of the house, and you'd like it to stick around because it's really expensive air. You paid a lot of money, you want it to stay. Well, it doesn't. It goes out through the gaps and it cracks the holes. And then what would happen if all the air in your house left and no air came in? You'd be like, I can't breathe, there's no oxygen in my house, right? So cold air always gets pulled in down low to make up for this hot air that's leaving out there. So that's what we call the stack effect. And that's one of the things that as energy auditors we're always looking for. You can have a stack effect or a convective air current even in a room. Like if you have a wood stove here or even a radiator, it's going to heat up the air. The hot air is up here at the top. It gets near the window. If it's cold outside, it's going to cool off. It's going to drop down here and come across here and warm up. So you can actually have like a convective loop in a room. If you have empty walls in your house, this same thing will happen inside your wall. So that the air that's against your inside wall will be nice and warm. It'll go up, and then it'll hit the outside wall, and it'll cool, and it'll go down along the outside. And you kind of get this like vertical loop going on in your wall. Here's kind of what it looks like if you cut away a house and looked for all the different places. The key takeaway here is the order is ABC, attic, basement, center. So the most important place where this phenomenon is causing problems is up here at the attic. If you don't have an attic, it would just be the top of your house. And then the other big thing is the bottom, right? The center of the house, yeah, there's a little bit going on there, but it's actually not as bad as most people think. One way you can tell, for yourself, if you want to go up in your attic, I would suggest wear a headlamp and wear a mask. But if you go upstairs in your attic and you have like blown pink fiberglass insulation, you might pull a little bit of it back and look at it where it's above a wall top or a light, and you'll find it's all dark and stained. And that's not mold most of the time; it's just dust and pollen and stuff that's in the air. But it's been coming out of that crack for 32 years or something. So it ends up leaving all that stuff in the fiberglass, right? Same thing here, like over this light. If you pull it up, you can see how it's all brown along here. Here's where the electrician, because the houses are like Swiss cheese. The electrician's running wires everywhere, pipes everywhere. They never seal these holes up. Again, it's only a little hole, but it's trickling out warm air 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 6 months of the year. And over time, it starts to stain all this fiberglass dark. And that tells you that is leaking air. Chimney chases like this, I have to be really careful when I take those pictures, because if you drop your phone, it might go all the way down and get stuck, or it might go all the way to the basement. By fire code, there should be a gap there. You're not supposed to have flammable stuff right against the chimney, but that doesn't mean it has to be a big gaping hole. And if you go back to this picture, if there's a big gaping hole there, that means any air getting into these walls will just go straight up and right out through there. And even air getting into the wall that goes this way will get in there, because the electrician ran wires through the walls from socket to socket to socket, so everything can kind of get into that chimney chase. So those are some of the famous ones. So you guys know enough to know, is this a good idea? An attic hatch made out of pegboard. Hopefully, if you have pegboard in your house, it's on your garage wall, and that's where you put your shovels and rakes and stuff. But yeah, this is a real picture I took of someone's house. I learned really early on not to look at that and be like, oh my God, what kind of idiot did that? Because that's when the homeowner's like, oh yeah, I made that last year. And you're like, oh, open mouth, put your foot in. So I usually say, that's interesting. What's the story with that? They're like, oh, that was here when I bought the place 10 years ago. And then you're like, geez, but people don't know. So they have things like this in their house and they don't even know it. Obviously, the answer, if you put 16 inches of insulation on there, it's better, but it's still going to leak air through those holes. The other reason to worry about air escaping your house is not only because that costs you money, but when the air is in your house, let's say it's 70 degrees, 50% relative humidity. If that air goes into your attic and all of a sudden it gets to be 40 degrees, well, the relative humidity is going to go from like 50 up to 70 or 80. They're sort of inversely related, right? So this is when you're going to have situations like this. That's not a roof leak or anything like that. That's all just interior moisture getting into a cold space. Technically when I see this, I can't tell the person it's mold because I'm not like a mold expert. I usually tell them to get a mold expert to come in and look at it, but this, I touch that, like, oh yeah, that's frost. Like, I don't have to take a class or get a license to know what frost is. Like, the whole underside of your roof is completely covered with frost, which usually ends up looking like that, given enough time. So, air leaks up into an attic, kind of a double whammy. The other place it comes in, again, is air is coming in, is at the bottom, right? So here's kind of a cutaway of a wall, the floor, the foundation. This is called the rib joist area here. No 2x4 is exactly 3.5 inches wide. They're always a little bit off. They're twists. They shrink. The foundations, so there's always gaps and cracks here. Usually people have mouse traps up here. Like, that's a sign that maybe there's air coming in if mice are coming in. If there is fiberglass stuffed in there and you pull it back, this is usually what you see, like a big black mark around there. And that just shows you air has been coming in there since the day the house was built, right? If you can see daylight coming in around your door, well, hopefully you have a door. Some houses don't even have doors to outside, to the, like a bulkhead. Yeah, obviously that's going to be a place where air is going to be flowing into your house. It comes in for free, doesn't stay free though, you have to pay to heat it up. So you can do a lot of stuff in your basement too. I wouldn't even bother with the center of your house until you do the attic in the basement, right? I mean, you can do some weather stripping around your doors. Make sure if you have a fireplace, make sure you've got a good damper that closes. Windows are nowhere near as bad as people think they are. Again, in the center of the house, like, you're kind of wasting your time if you haven't done the attic in the basement and you're just working on the center. sometimes you find some interesting things on the center of the house. This is a condo over in Dover that we did, and it was funny because they were in the New Hampshire Saves program, and every unit was getting their proposals in their email. And of course, you know how people in condos are, they all talk to each other. And so one neighbor was like, wait a minute, why is mine $5,000 and yours is, you know, only $4,000, you know? So they called me up like, oh, you trying to rip me off? Like, why is, like, our places are the same. I'm like, no, they're not. Like, let me show you. Like, in your place, whoever built it back in the 80s decided that this overhang didn't count as a wall, so it didn't even need to be sheathed with plywood. They literally just stuffed insulation in and then put vinyl siding over it, which is not airtight at all. So I could reach in there and like knock on the ceiling in their hallway.
Wow.
But their neighbor, for some reason, the crew that built that place knew enough to know that just because it's not a vertical wall, you still have to put plywood over it. So they put plywood there. So totally different situation, even though from the outside it looked the same. This is a house in Bedford that had frozen pipes on a first floor bathroom 2 years in a row. It was like 15 feet in from the exterior walls. Couldn't figure out why. And I went out in the backyard and they had an overhang on the back of the house. I removed a recessed light, stuck my camera up there and took a picture of looking back at the house. And look at this, they didn't even finish sheathing the house. I guess they saved what, $25 by not finishing the sheathing. So you can look right into the fiberglass, which means cold air is coming right in there and up and through and freezing pipes and things like that. So they cut corners. They never cut corners on like the granite countertops or the trim and the things like that, but it's in all the places that they think no one's ever going to see. Usually at some point someone's like, well, don't houses have to breathe? We need fresh air. Well, and it's true, you need fresh air, but your house does not need to breathe. Like, you need to have fresh air. You have to have good indoor air quality. But the fact is, almost everyone's house in here probably is way leakier than it could be or should be. There are sometimes houses that get down to the point where you have to start worrying about indoor air quality because you don't have air leaking in through the walls and going out through the attic and stuff, so you don't have that sort of constant exchange. But there's ways of getting that indoor air quality without just having to suffer through, a house that's like this. Like that's really kind of like Swiss cheese. That would basically be through a really good bath fan that comes on, for a few minutes every hour, or through what's called an HRV. And that would actually take outdoor air and distribute it into your house, and it takes indoor air and it puts it out of your house. There's a heat exchanger in here, so the paths of air kind of cross each other, and they give up their energy. So that way you're not like dumping 25-degree air into your bedroom, and you're not taking your 70-degree air and like shoving it outside, because that would be kind of a waste, right? So you recover some of that. The basic strategy is, seal tight and ventilate right. So that's sort of what the building industry and high-performance homes are shooting for right now. So that way you're still getting ventilation, you're just not relying on it happening willy-nilly here and there without your input or control or permission. This is all controlled and can be measured. Bath fan venting, it's terrible. First of all, you want to have a bath fan. Second of all, it wants to go outside, always outside. Not like that. That's not outside. That's close, but not quite. You don't want to have it detached. I almost never recommend this white flimsy plastic stuff. It's just terrible. It just disintegrates. This is actually a huge chunk of ice that was inside one that was starting to rip open. So yeah, again, this all gets at that indoor air quality issue. And the other thing to think about is like, well, if I'm tightening up my house, I got to start thinking even more and more about like where are the potential places that might be causing me to have indoor air quality problem. Do I have a crawl space like this? Like a lot of people probably do, like dirt crawl spaces. So there's moisture coming up. Do I have a bath fan that's just dumping into my attic? Do I have a bath fan at all? I'm not gonna, you can't tell people like get rid of your plants, get rid of your kids, get rid of your pets. Like that. I mean, we all have things in our life that we enjoy that could potentially be a source of like indoor air quality issues. So you just have to think about those things and make a plan for those. A lot of interesting studies coming out in regards with cooking in terms of gas stoves and asthma and childhood asthma. I'm guilty of having a gas stove here in Stratham, and I don't have a kitchen exhaust fan, and I know I should, but I just haven't got around to figuring out how I'm going to cut that hole in my wall and put it in. But there's a lot of studies now that are suggesting that there's definitely a connection between gas stoves and indoor air quality issues, especially if you have kids with like, asthma and respiratory issues. Hopefully this isn't anyone's house in here. That actually happened. I told you about the one in Portsmouth where only 2 people showed up. One of those people, when I showed a picture, like, that's my house. I was like, oh, yeah, double whammy, Yeah. So what do we think is going on here? If knowing what you know now, what's a likely sort of reason behind all this ice damming situation? Heat's getting up into the attic. What 2 ways could it possibly be getting up there? It could be no insulation or not enough insulation, so it could be just traveling through the ceiling, getting in the attic too much. What if I told you, believe it or not, I was in there, there's this much insulation, but it still looks like that. What else could be happening? Yeah, it could be, the chimneys themselves might be warm too, but there also could be a big gap around the chimney. There could be a bunch of recessed lights. So there could be places where the warm air is escaping up into the attic and causing this problem. We have to be really careful as contractors. I never tell anybody, oh yeah, we'll get rid of your ice dams, like you'll never have an icicle, because that might not happen. There are some houses that are designed so poorly that they might always have ice dams. It could be a ventilation problem. Ventilation is something that can help with an ice dam situation. You can still have ice dams though, even with a really, really well vented attic. But yeah, you're hitting on all the big ones that might be a cause of this. Obviously very dangerous if that comes off and hits somebody. I looked at a building in Portsmouth a few winters ago. It was near the parking garage. I don't remember the name of the street, but the building was like 4 stories high. It took up almost the whole block, and flat roof except for like 2 corners. The architect decided he would like be fancy and put this little dormer thing that stuck out, and it had a little curved roof over this section. It was only like as big as a dining room table, but it was just enough to catch the snow and hold it and then turn it to ice, and it would fall down. It crushed this guy's car 2 years in a row. Luckily he wasn't in it. And it wasn't even his apartment because they have numbered parking spaces and they all match, right? So it was like some other guy's apartment. That way, actually, I looked at it with the infrared camera. I went over there and did a big study. It had nothing to do with heat loss. It was just that it was a dark-colored metal roof and it was facing the sun and it was collecting snow. So not every ice dam is necessarily related to heat loss, but chances are, if you have big icicles like this or you have a big ice dam, a predominantly big part of that is probably because you got heat loss happening somewhere. And hopefully this is not the safe and easy way to get rid of those ice dams. This is actually at a hardware store toward the western part of the state. I always chuckle when I see these. I'm like, come on, give me a break. There's nothing easy about putting a 50-pound sack of salt on your shoulder and then putting on your big boots and going up your ladder and getting on your roof. Like, that's dangerous, Technically, it's not false advertising, I suppose, because it will actually kind of get rid of the ice. But on the other hand, what's going to happen in 2 weeks when it snows again? You're going to get another ice dam, because this is not like a permanent solution. This just gets rid of that one ice dam, right? So if you find yourself doing this or tempted to do this kind of thing, it's time to start thinking, well, maybe I should get at the root problem versus just, literally throwing, ice melt on it. Or putting it in socks and throwing it up on the roof. Or I looked at a building in Nashua a few years ago, and the maintenance guy was telling me that he had a 3-story office building with medical, doctor's offices, and he said he had to lean out the window, and he was filling socks up with sand and then putting a screw in them and leaning out the window and like screwing them into this big 6-foot ice pillar. It was like 30 feet high. It was almost like decorating like a Christmas tree, trying to get this thing and he roped off the parking lot so no one would get near it. You know how people are. They're like, oh, that doesn't apply to me. And they would walk right through it. He's like, oh my God, I'm going to have a heart attack. Like, someone's going to die. And they're going to blame me because of this thing. He's like, I had nothing to do with it. No. Again, going back to those ABCs. So first thing you want to do is think about air sealing, and you want to do it in your attic first. So here's a way of doing a chimney chase around an attic. This is actually metal fire. It's called coil stock. It's metal. That's fire caulk, so that has to be done kind of a particular way. This is an interesting case where they had so many leaks in the attic, and the insulation was so far gone that they just decided, let's pull all of it out, and we'll just put an inch or 2 of this spray foam there. This is expensive stuff, so you don't want to get all your R value with the spray foam, but just an inch or 2, and then we'll come in and blow like a foot of cellulose on top of it. That's why this wood is here around the chimney, because this is going to get filled up right to there. It's kind of a hybrid approach, right? So every house is a little bit different. Once you do the air sealing, then you can start thinking about adding the insulation, right? So here's a fella here blowing in cellulose. Hopefully he did the air sealing first, because it's going to be really hard to find all those leaks once you blow that in there. So think about the air sealing first. These are, pictures that are done by professional crews. So, if you're really handy, you might be able to pull something like this off and make it look good. This is somebody who had, 6 inches of that rigid foam board on the hatch, wooden barrier, insulate behind it, not insulate it here, so they can store stuff. But I just couldn't convince them to get rid of the stuff, If I could convince them to get rid of the stuff, it would look like this, and the whole thing would be insulated. That's what I like to see. Drop down stairs. Usually you pull it down, you can look right up into the attic. There's no cover or anything like that. And sometimes there's one of those little cheesy little tents or something, but they don't really do much. So this is the same thing as that. It's a real thick, 6-inch thick rigid foam cover with weather stripping. The kind of weather stripping you would have on your front door, basically. Nice picture of somebody who wanted to have storage and have insulation. So we actually built like you can see how thick it is there. We raised it up off the ground, built a platform so they could still store stuff up there, and then there's enough insulation underneath it. It actually is fully insulated. So, each place is a little different in terms of how you go about doing it. Capes can be really tricky with knee walls and things like that. This is a place where someone was finishing their knee wall, finishing their upper floor, so that was all been spray foam. That's going to be covered with drywall. This is a small little knee wall space where we added this rigid foam board in there. Lots of different ways of doing knee wall spaces, but they're all kind of tricky. Again, going down to the basement, right? Here's classic before and after picture, right? There's a bulkhead. You can see the light coming in. Because bulkheads are designed to keep out like burglars and raccoons and water. That's about it. They're not designed to keep air out. They're not airtight. So you can see the light, and there's no door there. Again, the house is 100-something years old, so that's not surprising. Kind of hard to put a commercially built door in that space because you can see how rough it is. So this was, a better solution. A lot cheaper and worked just as well. It's not pretty, but it works. Weather stripped, rigid foam board, some wood, some hinges, and you're good to go. So you want to have a good thermal barrier on all 4 sides of 6 sides, right? The 4 sides, the top and the bottom. But usually when we say bottom, we almost never literally mean the bottom up here. Because if you insulated up here in most people's houses, then you would have a furnace that's out in the cold, or a boiler and pipes and your laundry machine and things like that, right? Your water conditioner. So the better way of getting that thermal barrier on the bottom of your house usually is almost always to insulate the walls. Because that's kind of the natural barrier between the indoors and the outdoors anyway. If you have a really rubble foundation with granite boulders and stuff, then that has to be done with spray foam, because that's the only thing that's going to sort of take the ins and outs of the foundation wall. If you have a really smooth foundation wall, then this stuff can be used. It gets a little tricky though. So if you have water issues and stuff, you got to fix those first. There are ways of sort of messing this up pretty well. So this is where you might want to start thinking about getting some professional help. Needs to be painted to meet fire code. So again, center of the house, we don't do a whole lot there. Attic and basement is where we focus. This was actually sort of the center of the house. Technically, it was just in someone's closet. There was a chimney that went up through there, so that all had to be sealed up. If you have empty walls, you don't want empty walls. You want them filled, but this is not something that you really should do yourself. The machine that they might give you at the hardware store for free if you go in and buy like 20 bags of cellulose or something, that machine is not made to do this. That machine is made to do what that other guy was doing, which is stand there and just like blow it out loosely, right? This is dense packed cellulose, completely different animal. Needs a different machine. You have to take off siding, you got to drill holes and stuff. It's really complicated. So that's definitely something where you'd want to get some professional help there if you have empty walls. And this is usually not even recommended until you get your attic done really well. Because that, you can put this much insulation in an attic for way cheaper than it is to put this much insulation in your wall. And that's all you're going to get in there because that's how thick it is, right? And you got to do all that hard work to do it. So hope that makes sense. If you have a forced hot air system, you probably have ducts up in your attic. You're in your knee wall space. If it's a new house, they might be sealed. but if it's not a new house, they're probably not sealed, which means they have gaps and cracks and holes. You don't want to use duct tape. I know that sounds weird to not use duct tape on ducts, but it doesn't work. It just falls off after a year or two. So this stuff is called mastic. That works really well. Kind of messy, but you know, if you wear some gloves, you can get these all sealed up well. Usually at some point, there's no window salesman here, are there? Before I do my, yeah, usually at some point somebody asks about windows, right? So yeah, I mean, my window spiel, they're always going to be the worst part of your house. Even if you got like top of the line argon or krypton filled window from Canada, it's still going to be the worst part of your house. So why would you spend like $2,000 to make a little like 10 square foot area a little bit better than it is now and still have it be the worst part of your house? That doesn't make any economic sense at all. Now, if the seal's shot, it's fogged up and you can't see out of it, or it's cracked, or it won't open and shut, like that's a good time to replace your window. And at that point, maybe spend the extra money. But most of the time, that's really not going to be something that's going to save you any energy, or save you any long-term energy. The payback's going to be like 50 years. A lot of times people are like, well, yeah, but it's really leaky. Yeah, well, again, think back to what I told you about why is that window leaking cold air in your house? It's not just doing it because it wants to, it's doing it because it has to, because there's air leaking out of your attic. So a lot of times, the best way to fix an old leaky window is actually to get up in the attic and do work in the attic. And then you're like, wow, I made the window better, even though I didn't touch the window, right? Because everything's all connected, right? There's also lots of ways to improve a window that don't cost as much as replacing the whole thing. There are really good companies now that make interior storms that'll fit into your windows. Really popular, like in old houses, historic houses, where it can be really tricky to do exterior storms, if not impossible. Cellular shades will work really well, thermal curtains, things like that. Those things will improve a window, for much less than buying a brand new one. And like I said, even if you do buy a brand new one, it's still going to be the worst part of your house. So that's my window thing. Hopefully this isn't like what you are in your head. This is probably where you're at, though. I understand. It's a lot of information. It could be worse. You could live in this house. This is, believe it or not, one of the worst houses I've ever been in. I thought I was at the wrong house. The driveway, that's Lake Winnipesaukee down there. The driveway was a half-mile long going up the side of this mountain. And this house was in the New Hampshire Saves rebate program. I'm like, this can't be right. The lady in the office must have given me the wrong address. This can't be right. Sure enough, it was right. And they had ice dams so bad that they had sheetrock falling into in their living room. I looked it up on Zillow. I think it was about a $3 million house. Not very old and absolutely horrible when it comes to performance. So, if you think your house is bad, again, it's all relative. There's always somebody who's worse, and the person that's worse might be living in a house like this. So we'll talk now about kind of getting some help. If you're thinking that you're overwhelmed and it's a lot, then you might want to get an energy auditor to come in and look at the house. They're going to come in and do a big comprehensive look at your house. They're not going to just like go to your attic and then leave. They're going to be going into the crawl spaces. They're going to be going into the attics, the knee wall spaces. They're going to be doing combustion safety testing on all your heating equipment. And at the very end, you're going to get a written report that's going to talk about what they found. Here's the options for improving it or fixing it. Here's how much it'll cost. Here's how much it'll save you. Again, anybody can be an energy auditor in New Hampshire, so you want to make sure you're looking for someone who is certified. BPI is one of the bigger certifying agencies. There are some other ones out there, but that's one of the bigger ones. So it's up to the customer to make sure, or the consumer to make sure they're getting someone who's actually certified and trained to do this kind of stuff. If you're looking to find out where you can find those people, you can either contact your utility. Even if you don't get into the New Hampshire Saves program, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes, they will give you a list of the contractors that they use, because they're all sort of vetted and have to do work to a certain standard. There's also this group here called REPA, sort of nonprofit group. I'm actually the secretary of this group, and they have a list of people who have been doing this for a long time that are can be trusted to do it right. If you do get an energy audit, you probably are going to get a blower door test, unless you have something like vermiculite in your house or something like that. If you're building a brand new house, every house is supposed to be getting a blower door test in New Hampshire right That's not happening. I do like one every week or two. That's about it. I know there's other companies doing them too, but I guarantee you, there are only some towns in New Hampshire that are actually requiring that. But a blower door is basically a big fan that goes in the doorway. You suck out all the air out of the house, you depressurize it, and then you can actually figure out like how leaky is this house. Because you kind of know already that the house is leaky. It's just a question of like how leaky is it, how much is it costing. So that's one good thing it's good for. You can also actually do it to figure out how tight is the house, is there enough ventilation on its own. You can use it to find air leaks. You know, if I've already been in the attic and I've already seen all that stained fiberglass, well, I kind of know that stuff's leaking already. But sometimes you can use the blower door to kind of find some things that are leaking that you might not know about otherwise. So pretty handy tool. The other thing you might see is an infrared camera. It's not like I was watching TV the other night, late at night when I couldn't sleep, and I was watching some action movie, and the two good guys were chasing the bad guys, and they went into this warehouse or something, and there was two closed doors, and they both had infrared cameras, actually the same one I have, and the guy went up to the door and like held it against the door like this, and the other guy went up to his door and he held it against the door, and they looked at their screen, and he's like, oh, how many bad guys do you have behind your door? He's like, oh, I got 4. And he's like, oh, I got 8. He's like, all right, well, sucks to be you. You know, and then they went in and they fought the bad guys. I'm like, no, that's not how it works. Like, they don't see through doors. All it really does is tell you the temperature of the surface that you're looking at. It's really kind of basic and simple. You can't tell how many people are behind the door, you know? When I was looking at this wall with this little, you know, cute HOME home thing on it, this one is showing up a different color than that, which tells me there's something going on there, because they should be the same color, right? In this case, purple is colder, yellow is a little bit warmer. This is looking up. This is actually kind of weird because it's a summertime picture. So this is looking up at someone's beam in their living room, and you can see all this hot air getting pulled in. Because I had the blower door running, so I was sucking in the hot air. In the wintertime, it would look a little bit different. This was actually interesting. So this little triangular cavity here, you can see how cold that is. It's purple. That's right above a bathroom. They've had frozen pipes a couple of years in a row. House was designed by an architect. I don't know if the architect slept through, you know, the class about energy and insulation, but yeah. So the infrared camera can really do a lot sometimes to help you figure out, you know, things that you wouldn't be able to figure out otherwise. Pretty handy tool, and you can do this all year round. You can do it, you know, like I said, this was taken like, you know, in August. It's just a little bit almost like an opposite type of picture. You know, I'd be remiss if we didn't say anything about carbon monoxide. I didn't have time to do it before tonight, but I would almost guarantee you if you go to Google News and just type in, you know, carbon dioxide deaths into the news, you'll find an article from this past week. Somewhere in the country, at least one person died from carbon monoxide. Especially, I worry about like out west with all that snow piling up on all those buildings. That's really covering up a lot of, you know, flue vents and chimneys and things like that. And I think a lot of people they're so concerned about the snow and the weight of the snow and all that. Like some people I think aren't thinking about those issues. But carbon monoxide is a byproduct of any kind of combustion. Sometimes people think that it's only like oil or something. It's like, oh, I have natural gas. I don't have, no, you still have CO. Anytime you have combustion, there's carbon monoxide, right? In a perfect situation, you have a good functioning system that is taking all that and it's going out through your flue pipe to the outdoors. But you know, this is an older hot water heater, and there is a 2 or 3 inch gap here between the flue pipe and the top of the water heater. And that's by design. It's supposed to be there, but it's supposed to be pulling air in when it's taking the hot air and going out. But sometimes things happen and it actually starts to backdraft into your house. I was at my dad's house in New Jersey last weekend, and I looked in his, and he had a big bee's nest in there on the outside of the house. I'm like, yeah, does yours work? He's like, yeah, it works fine. I'm like, oh, that's good because like this is kind of clogged up, right? So, you know, snow, branches, critters, all sorts of things can happen. You put in a brand new industrial commercial kitchen exhaust hood because you love to cook and you get all these cooking surfaces. Crank that thing up to maximum, it's pulling out air. Well, that can actually suck all that carbon monoxide right back down the flue pipe and into your house. So, you know, basically you want to make sure you have a carbon monoxide detector for sure in your house. I recommend one for every floor and definitely one wherever there's a combustion appliance. That could be a wood stove, it could be a water heater, it could be a furnace. And again, you know, if there's any questions, that's when you want to get somebody in there who's a professional. You know, typically we would be testing all this equipment when we do the audit, and then after we do work in-house, we come back and we test all that equipment again at the end to make sure it's still working the way it's supposed to. By the way, I mean, maybe I should have backed up and said, carbon monoxide is not something you can see, it's not something you can smell, it's not something you can taste, it's like literally there, and you don't even know it until it's too late. It can kill you at a pretty low level. There's a lot of studies, well, I'm hoping there'll be more studies soon, but there are some preliminary studies now that there's a bigger concern now for people that might have like low-level carbon monoxide poisoning. So not enough to like kill you, not enough to put you in the hospital, but a lower level over a long period of time, right? You think about it, it makes sense. Like there's a lot of things in life that like, if you have too much of it right at once, it'll kill you, but if you get a little bit each day, that's also not so good for you either, you know, because it builds up over time and it does damage. So carbon monoxide is really something that, you know, every energy auditor is paying a lot of attention to when you're in a house, and so should you. Sometimes people have heating systems that are like, oh yeah, it works fine, no one's touched it in 20 years. I'm like, like this, you can't just leave it there just because it works and not touch it. Like even a newer propane system should be looked at every year. It should be tuned up, it should be checked for safety, filters should be replaced, et cetera, et cetera. It's not the kind of thing you just want to be like, oh yeah, it works, so let's just leave it alone, right? Save a little money, you know? Not the kind of thing you want to leave. This is another picture from an audit I did actually in Portsmouth, and so I told you like the blower door, it sucks air through the gaps and cracks, and it blows it out through the fan, so it sucks air in. So we were in the kitchen, we fired it up, and we heard a huge bang upstairs, and the lady was like, "Oh, what was that?" I'm like, "Oh, it's probably your cat." Or, "No, I don't have a cat." I'm like, "Okay, probably just a door, because it'll actually open and shut doors sometimes if there's enough airflow." Well, we walked upstairs, and all the doors were open. So I'm like, yeah, that is weird. What was that big bang? We walked into the bathroom, and I was like, oh, my God, the mirror was in the sink. Like, I'm not superstitious, but it didn't crack it or anything. But it was sitting in the sink because I pulled it right off the wall because there's a hole behind there that goes right into a huge attic, you know? And, of course, there's always a story. So the lady's like, oh, yeah, this was a flipped house. It was built in 1955. And I'm like, oh, in my head, I'm like, I can picture the medicine cabinet that was there in my head. And the house flipper was probably like, well, that's the easiest thing to do. Rip it out, chuck it in the dumpster, and you go get a mirror, put a nail in, and just hang a mirror over it. No one will ever know, right? And she probably wouldn't have known either, because she would have stood there like brushing her teeth every night. Even if she put her hand like this against the wall while she was brushing her teeth next to that mirror, she wouldn't have felt any cold air coming in, because there wasn't cold air coming in. It was warm air going out. And you can't really feel that, right? It's like if you blow on your palm, you can feel that. But if you go, I can't feel that, right? So the only way to know, and luckily I didn't, break the mirror or anything, but I was like, yeah, that's a, and of course I was like, well, how are the ice dams on that part of that? She's like, the ice dams are terrible over there. I'm like, the attic's probably the same temperature as your bathroom, and that's why your bills are so high, and that's why you're in the, the New Hampshire Saves program. So it doesn't happen very often that, dramatic things like that happen, but every once in a while something like that'll happen. All right, last section we're going to talk about is New Hampshire Saves. We're going to go through some of this stuff kind of quick because some of it is less probably applicable to you guys than other things. They do have a whole host of rebates for all sorts of different things now. It's growing each year. The one I'm going to focus on in a couple slides is this one called Home Performance with Energy Star. That has to do with getting an audit, getting insulation and things done, that kind of stuff. But before that, we'll talk about some of the other options they have out there. There's a lot of new options for heating and cooling, so there are some rebates for that kind of stuff. There's rebates for mini splits. I think we have a slide on those things coming up maybe. The other good thing about upgrading your heating and hot water equipment now is that in addition to utility, possible, like rebates and things like that, the new IRA Act has a bunch of stuff in it that can help you in various different ways. Some of that is actually like just already set in stone, like there's certain tax incentives like deductions and credits you can take no matter what. A lot of the IRA money is being funneled through the states, so it's up to each state to figure out how they're going to spend that money. hopefully our Department of Energy does what they say they want to do, and they're going to do a good job getting that program up and running soon. We'll see. Anyway, your New Hampshire Saves, and it's a little clunky, honestly, to get in their website, but if you go to like heating and cooling, you can eventually work your way in there and you can find out, what some of the rebates are for upgrading your heating system. But just like you wouldn't put water in a leaky bucket, I wouldn't be spending a lot of money to upgrade your heating system if your house is leaky, if you have no insulation. Like that's definitely, and I'm not just saying that because we don't do furnaces and boilers, it's just basic building science. It makes sense to get your house really buttoned up tight, get it insulated, and then start thinking about, well, maybe it's time to, get a better boiler or better, maybe put it in a heat pump or something like that. We mentioned heat pumps. Heat pumps, so heat pumps work on electricity, which up until like a year ago was an awesome thing. Maybe not quite as awesome now because the electric utilities have raised their rates, so some of that incentive for a heat pump has gone away a little bit. The people who put in a heat pump that works off of electricity and solar on their house a few years ago, those are the ones that are like really happy now because they're like, geez, all my neighbors are crying about the high energy bills, but I don't have to worry about it because I'm making my own electricity, with my solar system. So that's one of the benefits of these heat pumps. The new ones work, all the way down to negative 20 degrees. They're called cold climate heat pumps. This one here is kind of the traditional standard model. It's got this big boxy thing on your wall high up, which some people hate the look of that. So a lot of the companies now have ceiling registers. It looks just like this. It looks just like a register in your ceiling that you would have if you had a furnace or something. And they have ones that are low that come down here that are low profile and stuff. So you don't have to have something like this up on your wall if you can't or if you don't like the look of it or something. So they're doing a good job, I think, of figuring out what people want. The only thing they don't have yet, which I'm kind of bummed about, and I asked the Mitsubishi rep, they don't have any that go through the floor yet. And I asked him why, and he said that the stuff that's up there is so expensive and kind of fragile that they don't want that under the floor because it could get damaged or something. Which kind of makes sense to me, but then I was thinking, well, geez, if you have a hole in your floor and that's where the vent is, no one's talking about, maybe you don't have to put it right underneath there. You could put it underneath the actual wood of your floor over here on the side so that you could jump up and down on it. You're not going to hurt. It seems like there's a way around that, so I'm hoping that they'll do that one of these days.
The heat pump we had it installed and used our existing ductwork, so.
Yes, right. So they also, this is a ductless system. So this is the outdoor unit, that's the indoor unit. The thing that connects the two is like a line set that's probably about as big as my wrist. If you already have a ducted system in your house, you can get a heat pump that will work with your ducts too. Again, and they're super efficient. They're way more efficient than anything you can have. They're actually more than 100% efficient, which sort of sounds weird because it's like, how could something possibly use a kilowatt of electricity and then make more than a kilowatt of heat? That doesn't seem like it's possible. The short answer really is that furnaces and boilers and things are actually literally making fire. Like Tom Hanks in that movie, I made fire, right? They're making fire, they're making heat. A heat pump doesn't make any heat at all. It's just moving heat. So even on a day that's 10 degrees out, it can actually, using a refrigerant and a coolant and a compressor, it can actually extract heat from the outdoors even on a cold day and you make that into usable energy and usable heat and put it into your house. So that's how they get away with sort of that sort of trick. It also works for air conditioning in the summertime too. Huge benefit for a lot of people. So if you have, a lot of people are using, 4 or 5 window air conditioners. Those are not known to be very efficient at all. They use a lot of electricity. So if you had a heat pump, you might not need those anymore. So you can save a lot of money on the other end too. The heat pumps are sort of based on how big it is. It's per ton, you get a certain rebate, et cetera, et cetera. I won't go through this stuff too much. There is some funding through some of the utilities for some of this stuff too. Yeah, that's about that. Anyone building a new house? All right. There is this thing called the Drive to Net Zero competition. There are some incentives out there to make your house really super efficient. Unfortunately, the builder's the one that gets the incentive, so you have to work with them to make sure that they're passing that along to you. it's not like a direct to the consumer kind of incentive. But yeah, it's good to see that there are things out there for people who are building new. So here's the the one that I'm involved with, the one I know the most about, the one I think that is probably going to be the most helpful for most people, and that's Home Performance with Energy Star. You can go to their website here, and this is how you get into it. They're going to give you what's called an HHI number. It's a calculator. It's like a rating of how your house is. If your house is inefficient enough, you end up getting an energy audit for only $100, which is really cheap. They're usually $300 to $500 depending on who's doing it. It actually ends up coming off the cost of the work at the end, so you end up basically getting it for free. And if you end up getting in and all the things that the auditor finds meets the benefit cost ratio, which basically means the utility looks at like, well, how much is it going to cost to insulate this person's attic and how much is it going to save? If you're using oil or propane, the stuff that the auditor is going to find is probably going to pass that, right? Natural gas, it's a little bit trickier because natural gas is a little bit of a less costly fuel. So sometimes you could have two identical houses, one in Exeter that has natural gas and one over in in somewhere else that's using oil. Exact same situation, but this one qualifies and this one doesn't, just because of the oils, the fuel situation. Not very fair, I don't think, but that's just the way it is. They have some financing too through some of the utilities. Also, the best thing is they'll pay for 75% of the project, all the way up to $6,000. So that's a pretty awesome thing. A lot of people don't know about this program, or they think, oh, I make too much money. Like, it has nothing to do with how much money you have or don't have. Like that house I showed you on Winnipesaukee, like they got money from the utility. It's like they didn't need the money, but they were using so much propane that the utility wanted to, help them with that so they could move forward with that. So you go to their website, you get to the part where it says test your home. It might take a couple clicks to get there, but it's not too bad. You get there and then you click on test your home. And basically this is kind of the screen you're going to see. You have to fill in your utility, you got to fill in your zip code, and you have to fill in your conditioned square footage, heated square footage, which is not necessarily what the town says your living space is. I live in Stratham, but I don't know how they do it. But some towns will take like an unheated back porch. I'm like, oh, that's living space. We're going to tax you on that, right? Whereas other towns are like, wait, if there's no heat out there, we're not going to, that's not living space. We're just going to do heated space. So just be a little bit careful if you are using your property tax card to figure that out. Like, make sure you're actually counting heated space and not, every square foot of your house. So you put in all that stuff, and then you put in what you use for fuel. You're allowed to put in two things, which a lot of people are using, at least two things. So this person put in 800 gallons of oil, and they also burned 2 cords of wood. If you were in a situation where you have and there are people that do this, 800 gallons of oil, 2 cords of wood, and you use a couple tons of pellets, it won't let you put that in there, but you can still, that'll still count. You just have to call your utility and say, hey, by the way, and what they'll do is they'll take the pellets and they'll convert that to how many cords of wood that is or how many gallons of oil, and then they'll put it in there too. So a lot of times I have a fair amount of customers who, they're like, shoot, I don't get into the program. I'm close, but I don't get in. And then I get to the house and I do an audit for $300 because they're not getting the cheap $100 one. And when I'm there, I'm like, well, wait a minute, you have electric heat in this part of your house? They didn't include that, right? So once you add that in, sometimes that's enough to push you over. Or I was in Rye a few months ago, and the property tax card was literally off by 800 square feet. It said that the second floor was the same size as the first floor. I'm like, no, it's not. Come outside of the front lawn and look at it. It's smaller than your first floor. You got to call the assessor because you're getting ripped off. They're not doing it right, He didn't believe me at first, so I had to show him. So you put all this in, and then you hit calculate, and then it'll give you a number. If you get up here into the red, it'll say, congratulations. It's strange. So in the old days, when I first started doing this, anything over an 8, you're in. Because things have changed in the last couple of years, and for various different reasons, it's now not 8 anymore. And and it's not one number for everybody. It depends on where you live. So I think these numbers are right. They keep changing all the time, but I'm pretty sure I got them right now. Eversource and the co-op is 9. So you got it. This person would qualify if they were in, in Eversource territory or co-op territory. Liberty Electric and Unit Electric, this person would not qualify because you need a 10. So they're not quite there yet, right? Again, I sometimes have customers that it's like March and they're like, well, I got a 9. I'm like, well, you're still heating your house for another month. So like, go fill up the propane tank and don't be afraid to keep your heat high. And then look at it again at the end of the season. And that might be enough to push you up, right? They take 12 years of usage, right? And then if you're in Liberty Gas territory, unfortunately, I think it's a 12. So that's pretty hard to reach. And that has to do with various different things, like how many customers they have and this and that. I don't know. I've complained about it. I don't think it's fair. I don't think it should matter where you live. It should be the same for everybody. Because I think that just creates sort of bad feelings when one person gets in, another person doesn't get in with the same usage, same size house. But it is what it is. So it's worth a try, like I said, and make sure you're using the right numbers. Make sure you're using all your fuel sources. If you have electric heat, include that in there. So you do that, and you hit it, and then you get into the program. Auditor comes out. Auditor does his thing or her thing, and then you get a written report in the mail. It's pretty long, but this is just one page of it. But this is sort of a typical report. Like, so in this person's project, it's a $10,000 project. $3,400 of this project is insulating their attic floor, going from 6 inches up to 15 inches. Reducing the blower door test from 1900 down to 1700. Doing some insulation in the rim joist of the basement, insulating the basement walls. And you can see here that it tells you how much the rebate is going to be from the utility. It's actually not even a rebate. Like, rebate sort of infers that you get money back at the end. It's actually more like a cost sharing thing. So you don't even have to come up with that money. So the $10,000 project, the utility here is going to pay 6 of it to the contractor who does the work. You don't even have to worry about that 6. All you have to worry about is that. When you get this, it's not a take it all or leave it kind of thing. You don't have to say, like, I'm going to go with it or not. You could say, well, geez, like, I don't think I have $4,000. I got 2. So the auditor can go back and be like, all right, well, let's see. Well, let's get rid of the basement insulation, let's say, and just do the attic and the air seal, and do that. They'd have to resubmit it to the utility for approval. In other words, just because the utility said, yeah, we'll pay for this, 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 and this, does not mean that we'll pay for this and this all by themselves. They probably will, but you have to resubmit it because the computer has to sort of calculate what those 2 things do together versus without those other 2 things, right? So pretty neat, and each thing will have like a savings, estimated savings. Is it going to save $86.01? I don't know about that. I wish they would get rid of everything past the decimal point. I just think that's ridiculous that we actually are so full of ourselves we think we can, predict down to the penny what it's going to save. Like, we shouldn't be encouraging that kind of thought. We'd be lucky if we get it down to like the nearest 10, I think, right? So this is going to save about $500 a year. And again, that's based on energy costs right now. So if energy costs go up, that might, change. If it goes the other way, it could take a little longer, but in this situation, it would take 7.5 years. So again, 7.5 years, like if you just moved into a house and you're going to stay for 20 or you're retiring there, it's not that long. If you think you're going to, transfer in a year and move somewhere else, well, you might not want to do it because 7.5 years, right? So yeah, there's no commitment, right? You can move forward or not. Most people who are in this program do move forward though, because they're in the program for a reason. They're spending way too much money, trying to stay warm. So they're sort of pretty motivated to at least do something. Let's see, what else can I say? You don't have to own your own house. If you're a renter, you can still get in the program. Obviously, you'd have to work with your landlord. You can't just like do this and tell your landlord afterwards, like, I did this. Plus, you want to get your landlord to pay for it, right? It goes by the electric meter or the natural gas meter if you have natural gas. It doesn't go by your address. So, like, we did a house in Newmarket last year that had 3 apartments in it. Well, there was 3 separate electric meters. So the landlord got 3 rebates from the utility to fix that house up. So he got like $18,000 or something from the utility. And he only had to pay 4 or 5 to get this whole house done, right? So really, some really good things going on there. If you don't qualify because you don't reach one of these numbers, they do have this thing called the Visual Audit Program. You know, I don't know, there's not much to it. Somebody comes and they walk through, they give you some free LED bulbs. You do get a nice sense thermostat. You get a little bit of pipe wrap. So, yeah, it's free, so I guess it can't hurt, but, you know, most people are looking for a little more than that than I think. And if you're low income, there is a program for folks who are low income. If you dial 211, you can find out information about that. That's all done through the CAP programs. We don't do a whole lot of work in my company through this program. We do some, but from what I understand, I think a lot of the CAP agencies there's like a waiting list for this program, which is unfortunate, right? Because there's a lot of people who sort of fall through the cracks. Like they can't wait too long for this. Maybe they're like keeping the thermostat really low because they can't even afford to keep the house warm, so they end up not qualifying for the program I just told you about. So there's kind of a gap in there, which I think is unfortunate. But you know, at least we have some programs there. So if you or anyone you know thinks that might be appropriate, that is a good way to go. In some ways, this is even better because they actually pay for some things that the other program wouldn't even pay for. So you can sometimes get even more from that program. I mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits. Yeah, so there's a 30% tax credit for heat pumps. So that's up to $2,000. If you're going to get insulation and air sealing done, you can get up to $1,200 for tax credit. Putting in a pellet stove, $2,000. Even windows, despite what I said about them really not being very cost effective, they are. There's probably a window lobby or something in DC that said, oh, we need to get a tax credit for windows. I mean, I'm not going to say that new windows aren't going to save energy. It's true, but you can get some money back for that too. You got to make sure that the stuff you're putting in, meets all the criteria. Obviously, you wouldn't get it till next year when you do it, and obviously you'd want to do your own homework and consult your tax professional. This is just sort of basic information. There's a lot of big move towards electrification. So there's a bunch of stuff in the IRA too to facilitate people moving towards more electrification of their homes, for better for worse. So things like heat pumps, things like heat pump hot water heaters, even upgrading the wiring in your house or your electric service. You can get some rebates for that kind of stuff too. Not really familiar with some of this stuff too, but there are some even more improved incentives for that are sort of income qualified. This is the one that I told you about that has to be sort of administered through the state of New Hampshire, through the Department of Energy. So this is not really set in stone yet, but this is, I think, what most people think this program called HOMES is going to look like. So there could be some really significant rebates in there. And the good thing is if you take advantage of one, it doesn't mean you're out of the other one, right? So you can actually get a rebate from New Hampshire Saves for doing something like a heat pump or insulation, and then you can also take it as a tax credit too on the other side. So, nothing against the rules on that. All right, I think that about covers it. I think we talked about real basic things in the beginning. We talked about the ABCs. Hopefully everyone remembers what those are now. We talked about adding insulation wherever you can, but making sure you do the air sealing first. We talked about maybe getting some help. Working with the home performance person for real big things. A lot of the folks that I do audits for, they might get the audit and they might hire the contractor to do some of the work and then some of it they do on their own, or they hire the contractor to do some of the work now and okay, the other stuff I'm going to hold off on. 2 years from now, maybe I'll do the other stuff. It's good to kind of have a plan for this stuff. Versus doing it all at once, which is, in a perfect world, that would be great, but we don't live in that world, so. And then we talked about New Hampshire Saves and IRA, so. Anyway, I'll be around for a while. If anyone has questions, I'm sure you might. Thanks.
Thank you, Tim.
You're welcome.
Anybody have any questions?
Any big,